The best way to learn a language? Immersion, living where the language is spoken and using it every day. But if that's not in the cards for you this year, you can still learn a language the second best way, and that's with Babbel. Be a better you in 2024 with Babbel, the science-backed language learning app that actually works. Don't pay hundreds of dollars for private tutors or waste hours on apps that don't really help you speak the language. Babbel's quick 10-minute lessons are handcrafted by over 200 language experts to help you start speaking a new language in as little as 3 weeks. Babbel's designed by real people for real conversations. Babbel's tips and tools are approachable, accessible, rooted in real-life situations, and delivered with conversation-based teaching so you're ready to practice what you've learned in the real world. For instance, I've been using Babbel's convenient courses to help me learn basic conversational skills in German while I'm getting ready for a little trip I'm planning. It's not a language I'd ever studied before, but I find the lessons really easy and kind of like hand-holding me through learning a completely new language to me. And it's reassuring to know that with the help of Babbel, I'll be able to greet people, order food, and ask for directions without having to consult language apps while I'm in Deutschland. I'm still learning. Studies from Yale, Michigan State University, and others continue to prove Babbel is better. One study found that using Babbel for 15 hours is equivalent to a full semester at college. Babbel has over 16 million subscriptions sold. Plus, all of Babbel's 14 award-winning language courses are backed by their 20-day money-back guarantee. Here's a special limited-time deal for our listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only for our listeners at babbel.com/vulgar. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/vulgar, spelled BABBEL.com/vulgar. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Hello, I'm Alison Larkin, writer, comedian, narrator, and host of the Jane Austen podcast. Join me as we embark on a journey through Austen's timeless stories, starting with Pride and Prejudice. The Jane Austen podcast with Alison Larkin is available wherever you listen to podcasts.
Hello and welcome to Vulgar History, a feminist women's history comedy podcast. My name is Anne Foster, and today is a special sort of crossover event because my guest is Emma Southon, who is one of the co-hosts of the podcast History is Sexy. If you haven't heard of that podcast or you haven't listened to it before, I think you can tell by the name. It's great. It's very much got the Vulgar History tits out vibes. And so if you're looking for a new show to listen to, that's one that I recommend. Also, the connection between Emma and this podcast is that she's the author of the biography of Agrippina that I used as basically the source for when I did the Agrippina episode. And I forget if I said this when I was talking to Emma and we were recording, or it was before or after. But when I read that book, so her book about Agrippina, which is called Agrippina, Empress, Exile, Hustler, Whore, a biography of the most extraordinary woman in the Roman world. I read it and it's so approachable. She tells jokes throughout. She's making puns. And it's also really smart and really well researched. And that really showed me that you can do this. You can do history and also be silly and have fun with it. And that's part of what I do in this podcast. So really, she's kind of the fairy godmother of this podcast. So a bit about Emma herself. So she has a PhD in ancient late antique history from the University in Birmingham. After a few years of teaching ancient and medieval history, followed by some years teaching academic writing, she quit academia because it is grim and started writing for her own enjoyment. And thank God, because her books are so good. And her newest book, which is what we were talking about today, is called, so it has two different titles. In North America, it's just come out and it's called A Rome of One's Own, A History of the Roman Empire and 21 Women. In the UK, it's called A History of the Roman Empire and 21 Women, How Women Transformed the Empire. So those are the two titles. If you look up her name, there's a link in the thing. You can buy the book. A Rome of One's Own is the title that I read it by. And I do want to just say something to everybody. I didn't mean that to sound like I would like to make a statement. But just to be clear, when I have authors on this podcast, and someone asked me this when I was doing an Ask Me Anything on Instagram a bit ago, I read all these books. Like, I don't just invite anyone on my podcast. I read every book where I interview the author about them, and I bring them on because I think they're really good. And I think that the listeners, you all, the Tits Out Brigade, would enjoy learning about this book. And I think you would enjoy reading this book. So just please know, because sometimes when I'm interviewing authors, they're surprised that I've read the book. Because I mean, it is a time commitment, and not everyone who interviews everybody has time to read the whole book. But like, I always read the book. So when someone's on this podcast, know that I've read the book and I legitimately recommend it to you. And I guess because, holiday gift giving season or whatever is coming up, or if you just want to have a recap of all the authors who I've ever interviewed on the show, I do keep a list on my bookshop page. It's a list that's just called Authors Interviewed on Vulgar History. And all of the books are listed there if there was one that you remember hearing about that you thought you liked. And as a reminder that when you buy books using my link to my bookshop page, whether you buy books from that list or from other lists, a small percentage of the book sale price goes to me and to support this podcast. That's a little way. If you're buying the book anyway, you could use that link. Anyway, it's in the show notes. You just go to bookshop.org. And yeah, Emma Southon. So this book, A Rome of One's Own, A History of the Roman Empire and 21 Women. First of all, whenever Emma has a new book, I'm just like, I'm there, I'm in it, I'm going to read it no matter what the title is. I know it's going to be good. And it is always good, but this one has an especially good title because a room of one's own was a phrase that the writer Virginia Woolf said, that every woman should have a room of one's own. So a Rome of one's own. And so the women that she talks about in this book, and Roman Empire is not a thing I think about every day. There was that whole meme. The parts of the Roman Empire that I've learned about have been mostly people like Agrippina, like empresses, like that level of person. But she's looking at 21 women. And so there are some royals, there's some names you'll know, like Boudica is mentioned. But also it's a lot of just like quote unquote everyday people, just like the people who aren't often talked about. And that really helps sort of fill in the blanks of what was the Roman Empire like. It wasn't just a bunch of dudes in togas like inventing democracy and being stoic or whatever. There was like people every day doing stuff we hear about in this book. In this interview, she's going to explain about sort of a Bess of Hardwick figure who is like a woman entrepreneur making buildings. Like she talks about sex workers, just like people who are just like getting it done, getting through the day. When I read the book, I was so excited. And when Emma agreed to be on the podcast, I was so excited. And now I'm excited that you all get to hear this amazing conversation I had with Emma Southon about her book, A Rome of One's Own. Okay, so I'm joined today by Emma Southon. Did I say that right?
You did, yeah.
I just asked. Okay, thank you. Author of most recently of A Rome of One's Own, which is a book about some lesser known women from the Roman Empire. And my first question is, how often do you think about the Roman Empire?
Like multiple times a day, all the time. If I'm not thinking about the Roman Empire, then it's only a matter of time before I bring the conversation back to the Roman Empire, because it's one of the weirdest and most fun parts of human history, and I love that.
I was telling my friend Gina about your book. She's really into the Roman Empire. That's never been my specific thing, but I find so much interesting about it. And I said, yeah, it's this book. And it's about the women of the Roman Empire. And she's like, oh, yeah, no. She's like, the men did some stuff, but like the women, like that's where the good stories are. And I'm like, it's true. It's absolutely true. So first, can you describe, well, just for everybody who hasn't read it yet, your book? Like, how do you describe the book to people?
So the book is basically a history of the Roman Empire. So it goes chronologically from the foundation of Rome right the way through to the end of the Western Empire. And it is through the lives of 21 different women, mostly women that you have not heard of. So it doesn't have like your big Julia Claudian empresses or anything in it, because they already have books. Anybody who already has a book about them does not get to get put in this book, apart from Lucretia, who's kind of the one unavoidable. But it goes through the various phases of Roman political evolution, but looking at the way that women's lives changed and how the Roman Empire expanded to encompass lots of different people under the umbrella of Romanness, not just Because taking it back to that kind of how often do you think of the Roman Empire question, they talk about Romans as though they are just 12 men from Italy. But Roman encompasses millions of people from everywhere, from Libya all the way across to Wales. It encompasses millions of people of millions of different experiences that I wanted to include under the umbrella of Romanness. And then it comes back to the last Roman empress who actually did anything in the city of Rome.
So at the very beginning, like, okay, so I know until I read your book, just bits and pieces about Rome. Like I knew Agrippina. I knew kind of like the Cleopatra scenario, like kind of like the Messalina, like I knew just bits and pieces. But you're really filling in some stuff that I never knew about before.
That's my hope.
Like the founding of Rome, and you're like, here's this woman, and you say something like, I'm sure there's other women, but this is the only person whose name is mentioned. Like you're just finding, it's like, oh, is that a woman? Like there's so few mentioned.
Yeah. At the beginning, I mean, there's quite a lot in the mythical beginning of Rome that are knocking about, but there are certainly periods where there are not very many people who have names. It's really hard sometimes to find the name of a woman. When Romans are writing about themselves, because they kind of lay the foundations for what we think, or for what for a long time historians have thought was history, which is that it is only things that men are allowed to do. It's only war and it's only politics. And because women were banned from doing that, you only get, therefore, during periods of wild excess, the occasional woman who does it wrong. So the late Republic and the early Empire are these periods of kind of what the Romans consider to be like general insanity. And that's why there are so many women that come from that period, because they're also appalled by it. But in periods where things are going well for the Romans, there are not that many women around, because a woman is generally in politics a sign of degeneration. So you can you have to look outside of history and find women in other places, outside of like what I call capital H history, which is kind of the male-centered war and politics history. Once you step outside of that, or you're able to step outside of that, you can find loads of women kind of knocking about, living their lives, writing graffiti and and doing exciting things that would not make the history books that Tacitus or whatever would be writing, but are nonetheless kind of small H history.
Well, and I think just to that point, and just so that the listeners get sort of the overall vibe of what this book is like, there's a sentence I was just like, I got to save this line. This is so perfect. So I'm going to quote your book back to you. So this is just from early on in the book. You say, all of this brought much military glory to Rome, which is of no interest to me at all.
Yeah, no, it's not. As soon as
and it's not to me either. It's like it's skipped over the military stuff. So like that's what your book does. So I'm just like, great. You're already skipping the parts that I would have skipped if I was reading a book with that stuff in it. Yeah.
And there's so many other books. Like I can recommend you a bunch of books that will tell you all about the military stuff if you want to know about the expansion of the empire. But it, to me, just makes my brain turn off and my entire body go floppy in a desperate attempt to make it end. Because I just don't care about anything to do with the military or anything to do with battles. Like my brain just switches off. What I want to know is what's going on around that and how is that impacting stuff. So like the impact of all of that military glory is that money floods into Rome and floods into Italy, and then people get really, really rich. And then that really changes like family dynamics amongst elite families. And that's interesting to me. And then people get really fussy about the fact that like people own tables with only one pedestal, which is something that Livy gets really upset about.
Yeah. I know. I'm like, what sort of tables don't have one pedestal? What sort of table would they have wanted people to have had?
More legs, apparently. 4 legs good, 1 leg bad. Like he is just, but he just lists all of these things that are considered to be monstrously luxurious and a sign of denigration, and tables with 1 pedestal is apparently one of them. But like that, the impact of that, all of that military success is really socially and culturally interesting, as Romans try to wrestle with the fact that they're now really rich, but also they hate rich people, but not them, obviously, because they deserve it, and then produce all of this history that explains why they are so rich, because they deserve it. And that's fun. The actual fighting part, less so.
Yeah. So I'm going to talk to you about Lucretia just because that's where you start. And you said yourself, it's like you kind of can't mention her. So
Yeah.
that was a story I hadn't known. I read about it recently just in the context of Bess of Hardwick has these tapestries that show like great women from the classical era. And one of them is Lucretia. So I was like, oh, who's that? And I read this story and I was like, well, that's a fucking nightmare story. Like,
Yeah,
why would you put that on your wall? But I guess it's being like, I too am a good wife who would kill
Uh-huh.
herself, I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah. So Lucretia's so interesting because her story is that she is the wife of a cousin of the last king of Rome. And she kind of gets caught up in a disaster because her husband and his friends are having an argument while they are at war nearby about who is the best wife. And they decide to sneak back to Rome and see who has the best wife by looking through the windows of their houses. And they see the other wives are all drinking wine and having dinner parties. But Lucretia is spinning wool and crying. And in like Ovid's retelling, which is probably the most famous one, she is crying about how much she loves her husband out loud. And they're so delighted by this that her husband kind of wins the competition. But Sextus, who is the son of the king, is so overwhelmed by a jealousy and a desire to destroy, essentially, by the fact that she is so perfect and she's so modest and she's so honorable, that he comes back another night and he sneaks into her bedroom while she is asleep, and then he rapes her. But specifically, he will not take her by force. He tries to persuade her to allow him or to have sex with him willingly. And when she won't, he says that he will kill her and then kill an enslaved person. And he will place them in the bed next to each other, and he will tell everybody that he caught her committing adultery with an enslaved person and killed her, and therefore destroy her honor. So either she can live with a destroyed honor or she can die with a destroyed honor. And she chooses to allow him to rape her. And then the next day she tells her family what has happened, and then she kills herself, saying that she will not allow any other woman to live, using Lucretia as an example, as a dishonored woman. So she kind of reclaims her honor and then takes her own life. And then a guy who just comes out of nowhere, called Brutus, who just happens to be there, essentially takes her body, displays it in the Roman Forum, and tells everybody that the king has become a tyrant and this is what's happening. And like all of these other terrible things have been happening in Rome, but now even our wives aren't safe. And so as a result, they overthrow the kings, and that's the end of the kingdom and the beginning of the Republic. And it's this huge story in Roman mythology about themselves, and in the foundation of the Republic, and in what a woman is supposed to be and how a wife is supposed to be, and in how everything they do is supposed to be about preventing one person from becoming too powerful. And it's one of those stories that's just completely, there's no way of reading it the way the Romans tell it that's not horrifying, because they always put themselves kind of behind the eyes of Sextus, who is like creeping about being a rapist. And they always consider Lucretia to be kind of, at best, she is very heroic for one scene, essentially. And then Brutus takes over and kind of takes the story. And in the book, I explicitly compare her to the fridged women of comic books. She's a woman in the refrigerator, in that her purpose is to die so that Brutus can save everybody and the Republic can start and men can take over properly, which she is in almost all retellings. But there is also a kind of way of looking at her as a woman who is part of a lineage of other women in Roman myth, because this is all Roman myth about themselves. Basically, none of this really happened. But the reason that Sextus is such a bastard, and the reason that his father, who's called Tarquin Superbus, or Tarquin the Proud, is such a bastard, is because the wife of Tarquin and the mother of Sextus has befouled their family by murdering her father, murdering her sister and her previous husband, and overthrown a dynasty in order to install herself as a queen. So actually, the whole thing is because of another woman, and she only does it because she's jealous of her grandmother, who is Tanaquil, who made 2 men king, and she wants to be like Tanaquil. So really, Lucretia is the end of a long line of cool women who are doing kind of terrible or badass things, and the men are just kind of fulfilling their duty.
Who is the woman, the one in the middle there, the one who killed all the...
Tulia, her name is.
Yeah, Tulia. Yeah, I like the part of that story where because you tell that story in your book as well,
Yeah.
where it's just like, she's just like on this psychopathic rampage, and she will not stop. And eventually it's like her father is killed, and then she's like, run him over with a chariot, where it's just like, it's like she just can't not be doing the most evil thing constantly. It's like kind of great.
She is just relentlessly terrible. It's kind of amazing. Like, there's this bit where she goes on a massive rampage where, because her husband won't overthrow their own father, and so she starts screaming that she didn't get married just to be a wife, which I find really funny. And then she kills her husband and runs off with her brother-in-law, who's also her cousin, who's also and they just start killing and overthrowing, and it's kind of great. Like, she is just all of the sources just present her as so relentlessly evil in every way that is kind of beautiful. It almost becomes like iconic behavior because she just has nothing will stop her from getting what she wants, even if her father's body is lying in the street and she has to run over it with a chariot, which produces some very cool art from the Roman period, like of her kind of with her hair down, which is considered in Roman tradition to be barbaric, basically. So they always wear her with her hair down, kind of hanging out of a chariot, like riding over her father's body, because the Roman art is very often quite grotesque. So it just looks really very dynamic, very cool. You probably shouldn't emulate her, but she comes across like memorably, shall we say.
Well, and the thing about that too is I'm just like, I love a messy person from history, any gender. So I'm just always excited about it. But the Romans were like, oh, she's terrible. But it's like, there were so many terrible Roman men also. It's not just like, but she's especially terrible because she was a woman and allegedly did all these things. Yeah.
Yeah, she's doing all the things that a woman is not, like, they are kind of like chalk and cheese, basically, in that Tulia is interested in being powerful. She is interested in speaking in public. She has no respect for her honor or her chastity. She only wants to be in male spheres doing male things, basically, and will sacrifice anything to get what she wants. And on the other hand, you have Lucretia, who at one point, Sextus says to her that if she has sex with him, he will make her a queen and she can marry him and she can have all of this power and he will give her gold. And she says, no, her honor is worth more to her than any of that. And she kills herself to kind of reclaim her honor, and she spins and she never speaks and she'll only speak in private. And she is like everything. And her hair is undoubtedly up in a neat, very elaborate hairstyle. But she is, so they're like these two opposite forces of what womanhood is supposed to be amongst the elite. And they balance each other out. So one foretells the fall of the kingdom, and the other one foretells the coming of the beautiful republic that is obviously perfect and could never be fractured in any way.
You also talk in your book, so, like, again, I love the project of looking at people who haven't really been talked about before. And that includes some non-empresses. Like, can you talk about the women in Pompeii?
Yeah, Julia Felix. She's my favorite. She is a woman that we only know about because at the time that Vesuvius erupted and buried Pompeii under ash, she had put her business up for rent, and she had painted a rental advert on the outside. The business, like the space, was originally discovered in the 18th century by Bourbons. And they had dug up the inside, but no one dug up the streets for a really long time. And so they thought it was just a really weird kind of villa, or big house. They shouldn't really work out what it was because it has a really big dining space and some baths and a corridor, and then a really tiny living space. So nobody could work out what was going on until they uncovered the street in the 1920s, and they discovered that there is this big sign on the outside that says for rent for a period of 5 years. a leisure space, including bars and a restaurant and apartments and shops. And you can rent it for 5 years, inquire within to Julia Felix, daughter of Spurius. And from that, we're able to see that Julia Felix was a woman who owned and was running what appears to be a kind of leisure complex. So it has food bars around the outside, and it has baths. So you can get kind of takeaway food, basically, or have a quick sit down food. And then you can go to the bars, which are quite fancy. They're like little boutique. Like you can fit about 8 to 10 people in, which is quite little for, but it's quite fancy. And then there's like little shop area. But then there's this big garden, which has kind of fish ponds and little walking areas and a little colonnade, and then one little dining room, which appears to be a space that you can rent to go to dinner, basically. So you can go and have reclined dining, which is elite style Roman dining. Like most people are not in the Roman Empire, are not lying on their side being fed grapes by enslaved people on a daily basis. Like most people are just eating, sitting at tables like normal people. But apparently you could buy that as an experience in the same way that on a like very special occasion, you might go to a very fancy restaurant or a Michelin starred restaurant or something and have a tasting menu. Basically, that seems to be what Julia was running in her little compound. And she has this very, very unique frieze painted on her atrium. So instead of mythological scenes or scenes of abundance, which is what you very often find in fancy homes, what she has is almost photorealistic portraits of Pompey's Forum on market day. So it has all of these people like buying cloth and looking at shoes and being had like children in the forum being taught, and horses, and somebody giving a penny to what looks like a kind of beggar with a horse with a dog on a string, and just people kind of living middle class lives, basically, like people who are rich enough that they can buy fabric that is colored, and they can educate their children, but not rich enough that they have people in-house who are weaving for them, or people who are teaching their children individually, and people who own enslaved people. There seems to be a woman selling a child, but not people who have like necessarily entire households full of them. And it's this real kind of insight into a middle class kind of business life that you just don't get anywhere else. It's never written about. It very rarely survives in any kind of, like in most archaeology, because it is the kind of ephemeral thing that gets eradicated. It's not monumental. And so it's just such a beautiful space that you can see that this woman is running apparently by herself, because Spurius is either a person's name or could mean unknown. So she could just not know who her father is. And yeah, she seems to be running a business for the middle classes of Pompeii. And there's a point where she takes advantage of an earthquake that happened in 62, which is like just before, about a decade or so before the Vesuvius erupts, because she bought the complex next door and had a road moved. And they can see in the archaeology that there used to be a road running underneath the gardens that she bought, basically persuaded somebody that she owned the road now, and then built over it to extend her area. So she was a businesswoman with negotiating skill, who at the point at which Pompeii went off in 79 was ready to not be running it on a day-to-day basis anymore, and was like ready to hand over to somebody else to be her business manager, and she was going to go and be a property owner and hopefully live a beautiful life somewhere.
That's okay. Pompeii was like my entry point into being interested in history whatsoever. Like as a child, I read this book about Pompeii and I was just like, this is amazing. Well, just because for exactly that, like, because it's this slice of life, it's like time travel almost, because it's just, you can see everything that wouldn't necessarily have been saved from later on. And I'd never heard of her before. I didn't know about her, her little recreation center.
Yeah, and she's not very well known, but I have a friend called Sophie Hay who works at Pompeii, and she is obsessed, and she is on a one-woman mission to make more people know about Julia Felix. And she was like, "You have to put Julia Felix in," and I'm so glad that I did. But yeah, so it's thanks to Sophie that she is in there, and I'm just doing her work basically by telling more people about Julia.
Well, hopefully it'll get more people going to Pompeii to visit. It's like bucket list. I'd love to go there one day.
It is amazing. It's huge.
Yeah. Oh, amazing. When she was younger, my mother was in Italy and she was really excited to go to Pompeii. And at that time, I think a lot of stuff, this is like the 70s, was like moved out for some reason. And because she went there expecting to see like all the bodies, everything.
Oh,
and it's
yeah.
just like, oh yeah, no, those aren't there.
No, a lot of that is in Naples now. But they've done a lot with, like, they're much better at conservation now because they covered a load of stuff back up. Because as soon as you expose it to the air, it starts decaying, and it's really hard to keep stuff intact. So every sort of they're kind of uncovering stuff, but they're much better at conservation and things now than they were in the 70s. So
exactly. Another working class person in your book is Hipsala. Is that how you say it? The sex worker? And now we're just going to take a break for a word from our sponsors.
As a podcast network, our first priority has always been audio and the stories we're able to share with you. But at Realm, we also sell some pretty cool merch, and organizing that was made both possible and easy with Shopify. When you think about successful businesses like Aloe or Allbirds or Skims, an often overlooked secret is the business behind the business that makes selling and, for shoppers, buying simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. That's because nobody does selling better than Shopify. It's the home of the #1 checkout on the planet. And the not-so-secret secret that's definitely worth talking about is that Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%. That's more happy customers and way more sales going. If you're hoping to grow your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling, on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout we use with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/realm, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/realm to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/realm.
Hi, this is Rob Benedict.
And I am Richard Spate. We were both on a little show you might know called Supernatural.
It had a pretty good run, 15 seasons, 327 episodes.
And though we have seen, of course, every episode many times, we figured, hey, now that we're wrapped, let's watch it all again.
And we can't do that alone. So we're inviting the cast and crew that made the show along for the ride. We've got writers, producers, composers, directors, and we'll of course have some actors on as well, including some certain guys that played some certain pretty iconic brothers.
It was kind of a little bit of a left field choice in the best way possible.
The note from Kripke was, he's great, we love him, but we're looking for like a really intelligent Duchovny type.
With 15 seasons to explore, it's going to be the road trip of several lifetimes. So please join us and subscribe to Supernatural then and now.
People often look at me with confusion when I ask them what their only one in the room story is. They think it has to be like mine, where I went to a 600-person event and discovered that I was the only Black person there. I know. Horrifying, right? Hi, I'm Laura Cathcart-Robbins, and I am the host and creator of the podcast Only One in the Room. Every week, my co-host Scott Slaughter and I invite you to join us for an hour and lose yourself in someone's only one story. This podcast is for anyone who's ever felt alone in a room full of people, which is to say that this podcast is for everyone.
And we're back.
Yes. The sex worker who brings down an entire Italy-wide conspiracy.
The sex worker whistleblower of this murder cult, sex orgy organization.
Yes, she is. So Hispalia is back to 186 BCE now, and this is like a big thing for the Romans, which is the revelation of the Bacchanalia, and that this cult of Bacchus exists in Rome that is single-handedly going to bring down the Republic because people are murdering each other and having sex with one another and doing dodgy deals all at the same time. And it's this amazing story from Livy that begins with a formerly enslaved sex worker who's Hispalia, who is what's called a freed woman. So she lived at least part of her life under slavery. And during that time, she was an enslaved sex worker. And then she had been freed somehow, either because her mistress died or like just emancipated her. It happens quite a lot in Rome. And she had continued working as a sex worker by herself. And Livy calls her, Livy calls her a celebrated whore, which is a great term. He's pretty clear that she's not like a high class courtesan. Like he uses a bad word for her, but he basically literally calls her a whore. And she is working in the nice area of Rome, and she has a boyfriend who lives next door, who is a bit younger than her, and has not yet reached the age of majority, which is 21 in Rome. So he's 20, and he lives with his mum and his stepdad, and they love each other very much, and it's all very sweet, until one day he says, "Oh, I can't come round for the next couple of weeks because mum says that she's promised that she'll introduce me to the cult of Bacchus, and I have to be celibate for 10 days before that. So I can't come over because obviously we'll shag. So I just won't be round for a bit, but I'll see you when I get back." And she absolutely loses her mind and barricades him into a room until he promises that he will not join the cult of Bacchus, because she says, "I've been there. I was forcibly initiated. It's a terrible place. It will ruin your honor. They'll probably murder you." And she reveals all this stuff, that it's a sex cult full of sex people, and they're going to rape him and possibly murder him. And they love murdering people who are under 20, but at the very worst, they're going to introduce him to a conspiracy that is men engaging in poisoning one another and like forging wills and undermining evidence in court cases, which just feel like two very opposed things. Like one is paperwork and the other one is sex murders, but okay. And he goes, no, my mum would never do that to me, and goes home and says, Hispalia says something dodgy is going on. And it turns out that his mom and stepdad have spent all of his inheritance from his dad. They, instead of telling him, they were going to send him to the sex cult in order to have him murdered, ideally. And that's why they were initiating him into the cult. So he runs away to his aunt, who tells her what's going on. And his aunt then starts some kind of backroom diplomacy with other women in the Palatine until news gets to the consul, who's like the head man in Rome, that there is a sex cult happening in Rome. This is my favorite part. It revealed, like, there's this potted history of it where it's like 5 times a month people are getting together in a grove in the middle of Rome and doing sex murders and screaming and wailing, and there's machinery and there's people on fire walking into rivers, and it's a Bacchic ritual, it's Donatart. And the consul just goes, I just thought that was normal noises, which I just think is very funny. So he gets Hispalia in and says what's going on. Eventually, she tells him that this is happening, that there is like a second society occurring in Rome and it's going to undermine the Republic. And he promises that he will end it, and then it becomes political, and he initiates a decree and says that it's now banned in all of Italy, and you're not allowed to get together at night, because like night rituals are considered to be very bad, and men definitely aren't allowed to be involved, and it's all very dodgy, and we need to get back to proper Roman religion and proper Roman ways. And we know that this definitely happened because we have the copies of the decree would pop up all over Italy, which say specifically, like, you can't get together in groups of more than however many people, and you can't worship Bacchus in these ways, and you have to behave yourself and be good proper Romans. And Hispalia then gets given the rights of an actual free woman and some cash, which is nice as a result. But she, by attempting to save her boyfriend from a bad situation, she inadvertently exposes this massive sex cult, which is allegedly happening 5 times a month in Rome, that everybody is powerfully unaware of. And the story is a great exaggeration, but it's very, very fun. No one really knows where that version of the story comes from, or why even Livy includes it. Possibly he just enjoys the soap opera of it like I do, but I'm really glad that he did.
There's so many details I love about that story. I mean, firstly, the fact that Hispania is like, oh no, don't do it, it's so dangerous. And he's like, and then the reveal that actually, oh, it is that dangerous. In fact, his mother is sending him so he would die.
Yeah. But actually, she's not his nice mum. She is, because he's like, no, my mum would never try to hurt me like that. And then it turns out that she's trying to cover up her own crime. It's very Agatha Christie.
It's very Agatha Christie. And he's giving me just this really sort of himbo energy of just like, oh, I'm sure it's fine. I'm sure there's nothing mysterious going on. And Hispania is like, listen.
No, you don't. He's like a floppy haired Eton boy. And she's like, no, you need to pay attention and do not get involved in this. Bless him.
And just the concept that there's this like 5 times a month, this like screaming murder ritual happens like in the middle of Rome. And the officials are just like, I do hear screaming about 5 times a month, but I just thought that was just normal screams.
I just really thought that was just, I mean, people do disappear a lot, but I just assume they were on holiday. I don't really.
But then, and you mentioned this too, but it's also, you really draw a line under it in the book. Like the thing that the like men, the like consuls were most concerned about, they're like, wait, they're doing illicit paperwork? They're doing paperwork 5 times a month? Like that was the crime. That was what they were most distressed about. Yeah.
That is the crime. So all of the like official decrees and stuff, and then once it gets to the Senate and they're talking about it, they are completely uninterested in the sex murder parts. Like the fact that men are having sex with men and women are having sex with men, no interest in the idea that women might be having sex with women, but all of that, just there's this description of men being dragged away by machinery into caves in an imitation of the gods snatching men off of the earth. And not interested. What they're interested in is people secretly agreeing to give false testimony in court. Like that's the sex murder's fine, sure. Who hasn't done a sex murder? But yeah, false testimony.
No, like the vibe is kind of like Al Capone being caught for tax evasion, where it's just like, well,
yeah,
the only actual crime is this. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we couldn't get you for the rest of it. But if you were just doing the sex murders, we would probably not worry so much. But we really do have to. It's worth noting that the first law that they ever wrote down in the 12 tables, as far as we can tell, is if you are called to court, you have to come and you have to tell the truth. Like the thing, Romans love court so much. And it's very important to them, like law courts. You can't mess with law courts. You can mess with virtually anything else, but law courts they will get very pearl clutchy about.
And this is part of what's interesting about your book and just sort of the wide variety of people you're talking about. Like to me, like again, a person who does not think about the Roman Empire much at all ever. How often do I think about Tudor England? Another question. But I like when I think about the Roman Empire, like when that meme was going around about it, it's like, I don't, like Marcus Aurelius and like the Stoics. And I'm just like, of course I don't think about that. That shit's boring. Like, who cares? But your book is just being like, but what about all of these interesting things that actually were happening?
Yeah, because there's so much more interesting things than Marcus Aurelius writing affirmations to himself. This is what I find, that the fact that Marcus Aurelius is so popular really, really funny, because it's now kind of like publicized by a certain kind of manosphere person as being like, oh yeah, that strong Marcus Aurelius being strong, but they're written as affirmations to him, like everything's going to be okay, Marcus, we can do this, like you're going to be all right. It's like, today I'm not going to let people upset me, and they're not really like, I am a great strong man. They are, I feel scared, but everything's going to be okay.
That whole thing mystifies me. It's not a sphere that I'm involved with, but just I work for the public library here, and there's suddenly like so many holds on like these books about Stoicism and Marcus Aurelius, and I'm like, what is happening? Like, why are? And it's really,
this is Joe Rogan's sphere is got really into Stoicism, and there's this guy called Ryan Holiday you've probably come across. He writes all these books about how if you don't have feelings, then it's okay. It's really linked to that whole kind of manosphere, reclaiming your masculinity in a world of feminism kind of thing. It's very sad, really. It genuinely is. But I'm actually got to write a thing tomorrow about this. For about how, like, when all of these men are saying, I think about the Roman Empire, and then their girlfriends say, why? What are you thinking about? They all say Marcus Aurelius, or they conquered so much stuff, with a third thing, which is it's the foundation of our civilization. And you're like, all right, stoicism and conquering should not be the foundation of what you think civilization is. That is bad. And that is like weird manosphere stuff. I blame Joe Rogan for all of it.
Joe Rogan connection, I did not realize, but that is sort of like where it's coming from. That makes total sense to me. But that's where, well, and the way that the Romans, and this is where I really love this book, because it's people being like the Roman Empire. And it's like you said earlier in this podcast, it's like, it's not just like these 10 guys sitting around being stoic together. It's like a whole bunch of people from a whole bunch of cultures, like over a whole bunch of years, like living all kinds of different lives. It's not just that all the time.
Yeah, it's not just the point where people from one city in Italy were expanding outwards and conquering. I think people think of like Julius Caesar on a horse, like fighting Gauls, and like European men on chariots, or whatever, fighting barbarians. But once they did that, those quote unquote barbarians were then folded into the Roman Empire. And in 227, every single person in the empire was given Roman citizenship, which makes every African, every Asian person, everybody in Syria and Libya and Turkey and Greece and like all the way up to Hungary and France and Belgium and Gaul, and outside of Western Europe, huge amounts of people are Roman in both name and practice, but they will never be enfolded in the modern conception of Roman. And this is why I included so many Syrian women in the book, because Syrian women are never included in the idea of Roman, but they rule Rome for like 50 years. And there are millions of women in and men all over the Arab world and the African world who are Roman and who live Roman lives and fight for and live for the emperor and are consuls and empresses, and they should be included under that umbrella of the Roman Empire, not just Marcus Aurelius twirling around in a chair saying, I'm so good at not having feelings.
Well, and also what I think of too when I thought about the Roman Empire is just kind of like I, Claudius, just like Patrick Stewart in a cardboard room wearing a toga.
Yeah, no extras, no money for extras.
These shoebox sets. But so it's such an important thing, I think, to in this moment we're in. You know what? Congratulations, your book is coming out when like everybody's talking about the Roman Empire. Timing is great.
I could not have engineered this better.
Like thinking about the Roman Empire, well, here's another book.
Yeah, here's a way to think about it in a more interesting way and a way that will hopefully engage more people that also find conquering and stoicism boring.
Well, okay, so speaking of like the expanse of the Roman Empire, and also speaking of not conquering, but just like regular people, can you talk about the husband and wife who were in Wales, I think, or were they in England?
Yeah, Sulpica Lepidina and her husband Cerealis, they are Bavarian, so they're from Germany, basically, a kind of Germany-Netherlands border, where he is the leader of an auxiliary cohort who go to Britain, and they live on the very northern tip of the Roman Empire, near enough the Hadrian's Wall, which is in northern Britain, at a fort which is called Vindolanda. And we know about them because in the 1970s, uncovered were lots and lots of bureaucratic documents and personal letters that were written on slivers of wood, almost like postcard, thin wood that's folded. And most famously is one from a woman called Claudia, who writes to Sulpica and says, I'm having a birthday party. And I would really, really like it if you would come. And invites her to the birthday party that she's having at Briga, which is a nearby fort. And from that and from various other letters from between the two women is revealed this entire domestic situation whereby the two leaders of the forts and their wives and their children are living in the fort happily, domestically, going backwards and forwards, having parties, celebrating New Year together, celebrating Saturnalia together. There are like writing exercises which come out where it's clear that a child is being taught to write the Aeneid out, and then somebody has written that their writing is lazy. So there's also tutors there. The letters, like the personal letters, are written in two hands. So one is a kind of very professional, neat hand. And then what happens is you write the kind of proper letter and then you fold them over. And then Claudia herself has written kind of words of endearment on the front. So she has written in a very bad handwriting that suggests she's not very used to it, like to my most beloved sister, Severina. So there's also enslaved people probably, or freed people who are acting as secretaries for them. And through the archaeology of Vindolanda and other northern forts in kind of Germany and the Netherlands and Belgium and the like, you see them as spaces that are not kind of hard, Spartan, big man areas of deprivation and misery, like I think they're kind of imagined and that they're very often portrayed as. Like if you've seen, what's that Channing Tatum film about the Last Eagle? Like they're always portrayed as like really Spartan places. They're miserable and have nothing in them. But we have, for example, a list of everything that they brought with them, that Cerealis and his wife brought with them, which includes egg cups, bronze cups and bronze plates, like cushions and curtains, which are dyed scarlet and purple, which is expensive in the Roman Empire. Like you have to spend money. So, and they have all of these leather shoes that come out as well, hundreds of shoes that come out of Vindolanda, which are women's shoes. They're beautiful shoes. They are children's shoes all over, not just in the quarters of the elite, but also in the general barracks. There are women living there because although technically Roman soldiers were not allowed to marry, most places are not filled with Roman soldiers. They're filled with auxiliaries who are taken from places that the Romans had conquered and are kind of conscripted but not officially citizens. And so they totally are allowed to marry, or they were married before and they brought their wife with them, which is what Cerealis did. And so there are tons of women and children in these spaces, and they are really domestic spaces, and they're actually quite soft spaces, at least in part, with cushions and luxurious items. And there are places where you can also have parties and have a little birthday party and invite your friends.
There's something so genuine like that. The birthday party invitation, it reminds me, I mean, that, and then like Julia Felix being like space for rent, where it's just like people have always just been people. Yeah. Like I often still think about people in the past as being like they are in films, being very sort of formal and speaking with this sort of British accent and just being like, we are from the oldie times. But it's like, no, people are just people.
Yeah. And that's always like, whenever I find a story about somebody falling over, that's always the most endearing thing to me because I fall over all the time. And like something that I like to think about a lot is people in the past, like stubbing their toes on tables or banging their elbows on doors or trying to fold a curtain and getting tangled up in it. Like just because they are people and they feel basically the same that we feel, which is like grumpy most of the time and tired very often. And if you're talking about, especially when you're talking about royals, and if you're talking about like Roman royals, most of the time they're wearing 2 meters of wool. And so they're probably uncomfortable. And if you read medical texts, like they don't have antibiotics or painkillers. They're doing things like rubbing poppy brain in their eye. Like they're probably just uncomfortable all the time. And like, the being people and being embodied people part of the past is the part that I love the most. So this idea of like Claudia writing that she really wants her to come and it will make her really happy if she can come to her birthday party, and then her getting in a little carriage and riding over there in order to have whatever version of Roman birthday cake there was is just so lovely to me.
But also speaking of Roman people and happenings in the UK area. So you have a chapter where you talk about, do you say Boudica or Boudica?
Boudica.
Boudica. So you talk about her, fairly well known. I have done an episode about her on this podcast. But then you contrast her, you sort of put in parallel this other queen. Can you talk about... I keep asking you, I'm like, what was the names? And here's the thing. I can't pronounce any of the names. And secondly, it's all the same name. Every story you have, it's like, well, the mother had this name and she had this name and her sister had the same name. And then he married. It's just like the names are like, I can't.
Yeah, no. If in doubt, just assume they're called Julia, because they're either Julia or Claudius. This one is not, because she is British and she is from Yorkshire, so she's called Cartimandua. She exists at the same time as Boudica, Cartimandua, and everybody knows the story of Boudica, kind of the uprising and leading an army against the Romans and burning down London and St. Albans and all the other places. But at the exact same time, Cartimandua was a client queen who lives in Yorkshire, so kind of across the top of England. She rules a group called the Brigantes, which is probably the biggest kingdom, such as it is in England at the time. And she immediately capitulates to the Romans when they turn up. When Claudius turns up, she's just like, yep, sure, fine, okay, can't fight you, not interested. And agrees perfectly, reasonably, that she will continue as she is, and in exchange she will basically keep everybody paying Roman taxes. So you pay tribute to the Romans and you pay whatever tax, and hope that the Romans leave you alone, which they do. And then she endears herself to them completely. She really collaborates with the Romans. She's like a proper Quisling from the kind of rebel perspective, because the pre-Boudica big rebel is called Caraticus. He fights Claudius and then continues fighting for like a decade and a half afterwards, until he loses a big battle in Wales and flees to Yorkshire. He turns up on Cartimandua's doorstep, and she immediately turns him over to the Romans. Like, she takes him in, locks him in a room, and immediately sends people down to Colchester, where the Romans are, and says, I've got him. Do you want to come and get him? And they do. They take him back to Rome. They parade him as a kind of great hero that they have conquered. And as a result, Cartimandua becomes like their favorite client queen in Britain. And she gets given all kinds of privileges. She gets reductions in what she has to pay. She gets left alone almost completely, because now she has proved her total devotion to the Roman Empire. Like, as if you have proven that hard that you are willing to do anything for them, then they will leave you to do whatever you want. They come and rescue her when her husband rebels against her, because her husband is very unhappy about the fact that she has turned in Caraticus, and he goes off to become the new leader of the rebellion, essentially. And they rescue her whenever he comes and fights her. She is very silent during the Boudica uprising. Boudica uprising is in 60, it only lasts about a year, and she is just extremely quiet during the whole thing. Like, had she joined in, then it would have been really problematic for the Romans, because she would have been coming down from the north, and with Boudica from the south, it would have been a real, actually might have forced the Romans out. And there's an alternate history there that somebody can write, but she absolutely did not. She stayed where she was, and eventually she only lost her throne because the Romans couldn't fight her husband, basically. And so because there was there was the year of the 4 emperors going on, and they didn't have the strength to do it. So they just rescue her and move her to Rome in order to save her life. And then, because they no longer have a client king or a client ruler in the Brigantes area, as soon as there is stability again in Britain, they crush it and destroy it as an independent kingdom, and cover it, absolutely blanket it in Roman forts. And that is the area where that became kind of the top of the Roman Empire. And is along there is where Hadrian's Wall is. So she managed to hold off the Romans by collaborating and kind of protecting her kingdom from the kind of the brutal reality of what Roman invasion was, which is that they would come through, burn down all your houses, and enslave anybody that they could see within a 10-mile radius, and then put them to work somewhere for a really long time. It's not until the end of the 60s. So she holds them off for 20 years. and then a man comes along and ruins everything.
Typical.
As they do.
So your book is A Rome of One's Own. First of all, congratulations on that title. That's a great title.
Thank you. I have to give full credit to my friend Fiona for that one, but it's fantastic.
It's great. And it really sets the tone because the book is fun and funny and different from other history books. And I really want to emphasize that to the listeners who maybe haven't read your stuff before. It's similar to what I do when I'm doing a biography episode of my podcast. Like, I'm giving the facts, but I'm also making silly jokes. And that's what your book is like as well.
Yeah, because I think the history is really funny. That's the reason that I like it. So I just want other people to realize that history is not just a kind of dry litany of things that happened and dates, that it is actually, history is people. And if you like people, or even think that people are slightly funny, I think if you like watching YouTube vlogs, then you should like history because it's just YouTube vlogs in the past. Like,
it's just, and there's also a lot of really fun scandal in your book. There's a lot of, oh my gosh, there's
so
like we
scandal.
talked about the with the Bacchanalia cult and stuff, but there's other sexy scandals as well in this book. So it's funny and it's also sexy. So, everyone should read it. But Can you let everybody know who are now fans of you, if they weren't already, where they can hear you on your own podcast and where they can find you on social media and things?
So you can find everything at emmasouthon.com. You can listen to my podcast, which is called History is Sexy, because history is sexy, unless your browser or workplace internet blocks the word sexy, because apparently it sometimes does, in which case just go to emmasouthon.com and it's there. And I am Nuclear Teeth on Instagram. So you can find me in those places.
What can you share does nuclear teeth mean?
So this is a thing that seemed like a good idea like a million years ago when I was starting my Twitter account, like 15 years ago. It is based on the fact that there was an experiment, a long-running experiment in the 1960s and 70s, I believe, in America, where a woman was testing whether living nearby a nuclear power plant affected kind of like if the nuclear isotopes or whatever got into the bones of people who grew up near them. So she collected teeth from children so they got rewards if they sent their baby teeth as they fell out to this lab, and they got a little badge for it. And on the day I started my Twitter account, like 15 years ago, which I've now deleted, that I got an email from a history, what things happened today email list that used to exist that was called Nuclear Teeth, and I thought that's a good title. So that's what it means, and it's now stuck. But it means I get to tell people about that experiment, which I think is cool. Just this woman collecting loads of teeth in her lab for decades, and it turns out that living near a nuclear power plant will not put uranium in your bones, so that's good.
That's a happy ending, because I was thinking about all these children sending their teeth and then later like rotting away like the radium girls or something.
No, it's okay. It turns out like because they're obviously like the teeth are there already, so they can see how they grow, and like then they can test the uranium in children who grew up like various distances from power plants, and apparently it's fine. So that's good. They are all okay, and they got a cool badge that says I donated my tooth to nuclear science.
Honestly, as a kid, that would be really cool. I would have loved one too.
I would have loved one.
Frankly,
I would love one now.
Listeners, do you have one? Send it to us. Thank you so much for talking to me about your book. It's such a fun time to read it. And I think I said before we started recording, but your book about Agrippina was really influential to me in showing that history can be funny and cheeky and silly. And that's very much the vibe of my podcast as well. So thank you for being an influence on me as well.
Well, thank you. Thank you for reading it and telling people about it. And for also being, it's nice that I'm not the only person that other people are like, oh God, yeah, no, history is fun, and join in. And I like that.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So again, just
The title's memorable, but I'll say it again. A Rome of One's Own by Emma Southon is available now in North America. In the UK, it's been out for a few months under the title A History of the Roman Empire in 21 Women. And you can find all the links to Emma's everything, her podcast, her social media, links to buy the book and stuff is all at emmasouthon.com. And, I'm going to tell you about a thing that I like to tell you about every so often, which is our brand partner, Common Era Jewelry, which really connects with today's episode, actually, because this is a 100% woman-owned business using 100% recycled gold, and they make jewelry, fine jewelry, inspired by women from the classical world. So we're talking ancient Rome, ancient Egypt, ancient Greece. Some of the pieces that they have includes people that we've talked about on this podcast today, like Boudica, Agrippina. There's a quiz on the website of which difficult women are you, and I got Agrippina, and I was like, hell yeah. But she's also got, I say she because Tori is the owner. She's also got pieces inspired by other people we've talked about on this podcast, like Cleopatra is there, and Anne Boleyn as well. It's all people from the classical world, and also Anne Boleyn because she's just that important. Anyway, so they make their pieces made to order, which means there is no waste. Like when you order something, they I don't know what the word is, they smelt it for you right away. So I chose to work with this brand partner because everything she's doing is just vibes with me completely. Pieces are also made entirely in New York City. Everyone involved has healthcare and good wages. Even the packaging is made by a little family-owned business in Chicago. So the jewelry is made of all the tits out women who you know and love. And also the company is such a delightful small business that I love to support them. Anyway, they also have pieces inspired by classical mythology as well, like goddesses from Greek mythology, the Muses. I have a necklace with Medusa on it, which so far when I'm wearing it, I have not yet turned men into stone, but one day maybe I will. I'm not making that claim that the necklace will give you the powers of Medusa, but it makes you feel like you have the powers of Medusa. Anyway, so their pieces are available. There's necklaces, there's rings. They're available in solid gold as well as in more affordable gold vermeil. The Anne Boleyn is coming out in gold vermeil later in November, so stay tuned for that. I'll let you know when that is available. And Vulgar History listeners can always get 15% off anything from her collection from Common Era by going to commonera/vulgar or using code vulgar at checkout when you go to commonera.com. That's Common Era Jewelry. And if you want to get in touch with me, I have a website, which is vulgarhistory.com. You can also email me at vulgarhistorypod@gmail.com. I'm on Instagram at vulgarhistorypod is where my social media is most often, although I'm using Blue Sky a little bit, which I pronounce Blueski because it looks like someone's surname, Blueski. Anyway, Instagram is where everything's happening. I also have merch available at vulgarhistory.com/store, or if you're outside the US, I recommend using our Plan B merch store, which is vulgarhistory.redbubble.com, and there is new stuff pending. So stay tuned for that. I'm not planning any specific holiday stuff like Christmas or Hanukkah stuff, but there is going to be something new coming there soon that might have to do with Lola Montez. So stay tuned. Anyway, you can also support the podcast on Patreon at patreon.com/AnnFosterWriter. So for $1 a month, you get early ad-free access to all episodes of Vulgar History. If you pledge $5 or more a month, you get early ad-free access to all episodes of Vulgar History, as well as access to our Discord server where we hang out and we chat. As well as at that level, you get bonus episodes of Vulgar Peace Theater, where I talk about costume dramas coming up soon. I'm going to be talking about The Lion in Winter, which is the Katharine Hepburn movie about Eleanor of Aquitaine. Also, there's bonus episodes there. So This Asshole, as well as The After Show. And also there's a thing, so you can also join the Patreon for free. And when you join the Patreon for free, you can just see anything I post publicly, as well as you can also see you get access to our book club, which is still going on. So we're doing the Vulgar History book club. We're talking about Let the Dead Bury the Dead by Alison Epstein. You go to vulgarhistory.com/book club. Where it takes you is basically to the Patreon free page where we're talking about this book. Have you got the book? Have you read the book? Let's talk about the book. Coming up soon, I'm going to be doing a video chat with Alison about the book. So I've got a post up there now saying, what questions do you want me to ask Alison in this? I don't know. We'll call it Ask Alison Anything, AAA, coming up soon. And then also you can get transcripts of recent episodes of this podcast at vulgarhistory.com. The newest episodes are where you'll find the transcripts because our colleague Aveline Malik from the Wordery has been working sort of like back to front, providing these transcripts. Thank you so much, Aveline, for providing these transcripts so people can read this podcast. And until next time, everybody, keep your pants on and your tits out. Vulgar History is hosted, written, and researched by Anne Foster and edited by Christina Lumagi.
Welcome to the small town of Chinook, where faith runs deep and secrets run deeper. In this new thriller, religion and crime collide when a gruesome murder rocks the isolated Montana community. Everyone is quick to point their fingers at a drug-addicted teenager, but local deputy Ruth Vogel isn't convinced. She suspects connections to a powerful religious group. Enter federal agent V.B. Laureau, who has been investigating a local church for possible criminal activity. The pair form an unlikely partnership to catch the killer, unearthing secrets that leave Ruth torn between her duty to the law, her religious convictions, and her very own family. But something more sinister than murder is afoot, and someone is watching Ruth.
Chinook, starring Kelly Marie Tran and Sanaa Lathan. Listen to Chinook wherever you get your podcasts.
Ah, the web tour. Those that both created and were created by the threads disentangle from the fringes to feast on the very thing that spawned them.
What's that, Silly? This is how you deal with weird!
No! Do not harm my children! Oh, you lost a feather. Can I keep it?
No, you can't force me to!
Do you know what lies within nothing?
Rocket is in trouble, Akasa! Can we turn on the windshield remotely?
No, she could lose her job as an Akasar.
I don't fear Vehar.
No, but you fear me. If you intend to trick me, I will not hesitate to sever the oath bond entirely.
Why didn't you help me? Coward! I don't have a parachute! I don't like free falling!
Counterbalance, a high fantasy audio drama. Season 2, coming 15th of October 2023. Learn more on trilunas.com.